environmental protection agencies, etc., councils have reacted to that appropriately. You know, they've started to increase penalties and become a lot more diligent around their activities and around our activities. So this extract here is from, from a 5-year period, not the last couple of years, but that 3.5% increase is really quite significant. Sorry, 3.5 times increase is really quite significant. And a good example of that would have been a couple of years ago with our previous owners, where we had a really significant diesel spill. What's noteworthy from this is that the penalty wasn't just around water pollution, it was also around accurate record keeping, or the lack of, which are factors that contributed to the spill happening. I suppose what I learned from this event was that you don't want to go through it again. Going to court is very intensive on your time, and it takes you away from doing core activities and all the preventative work that you prefer to be doing. I reckon I probably spent two or three months of my part-time work just responding to this incident over a couple of years. So it's a real killer. So this is a tier one offence. It's the highest level, and it was for negligence, there was no willful intent there, but it was negligent, and it was negligent because the record was, the documents, drawings weren't accurate enough to prevent this from happening. So, if you're a business owner or an officer of the corporation, then I think you need to really take note of what your personal liability is now. There's not just substantial fines for corporations, but there's also severe penalties for individuals, and that can even lead to jail sentences. And I think going back to that ardent leisure case, I think the UK were looking for that big number because they increased their fines. They're probably looking for a $1 million fine there. I was quite surprised looking on another legal website to find that Western Australia has the highest penalties, but this relates to work health and safety. But why is work health and safety important to fuel systems? Well, because most of that infrastructure comes under work health and safety, OHS, dangerous goods, Department of Mines, etc. It's only the groundwater contamination or the response from the issue that really come under the Environment Act. So we need to kind of look at it from both angles, because if you do get a leak or a spill, then we're attracting a second level of attention, for potentially a dangerous occurrence and uncontrolled release of liquid. So just have a look at both sides of the coin there. If you're in an operational role like myself, I think it's really important to speak with the owners of the business, those that really carry the ultimate risk, and make sure you understand what their risk appetite looks like. They may have deep pockets, but they may not want to pay for all the legal costs, but especially they probably don't want to damage your reputation. Reputation really impacts on your fuel sales, on ongoing business, and you may have future capital works planned. You may be willing to carry some additional risk for a couple of years, but you might be at a point where your fuel system is at its kind of end of age and at your highest risk level. So I think you've got to really weigh that up, whether you want to kind of cut back because you've got capital works coming, or whether you want to increase your level of oversight until that's actually happened. When I first started looking at our fuel systems, I really didn't know enough about them. I know quite a lot about fuel systems now, and I suppose with Marinas, there's usually quite a lot of change that goes on. Businesses are built on sites that may have been developed 100 years ago. They've gone through lots of change. There could be abandoned tanks, old fuel lines, decommissioned systems that you just don't know about. And it's very hard to find a record unless you can speak to the right people to see what is under the ground. If you've got steel fuel tanks, have they got cathodic protection? If they're buried anodes, when were they last tested? When did they last do a continuity test and check that they're still working? Are they replaced every 5 years, etc.? If you've got leak detection systems, do you know how they actually work? Because most mechanical leak detection systems don't actually stop the fuel leaking. they just reduce the flow rate. So your customer at the fuel dock is still trying to get fuel into the road. It's taking ages, but in the meantime, he's pumping it out into the river or the ocean. So it's really important to get hold of the manuals and really scrutinise the system you've got and get to understand it as well as you can. And I think once you understand your system properly, then you can start managing your risk. I understand the legal requirements in New South Wales and Victoria reasonably well, but it's a bit of a minefield trying to find common components when you're looking into the other states, because none of it sits under a common approach to legislation. It doesn't all sit under work health and safety law or under the Pollution Act, etc. It's kind of buried. Some of it's regulated by councils, some is regulated by the high-level regulators. It's always worth considering your precedents of law there, your acts and regulations you've obviously got to comply with, the legal requirements, and then your code of practice, tell you how to comply with that. But then when it comes to Australian standards, we were talking about them earlier, with the Marinas standard becoming, the standard rather than a guide. Unless an Australian standard is actually gazetted and put into law and listed within an act, it's not a legislated standard. It's still a guideline, but it is the best. It is the best practice that you're going to have. So usually these various standards, 4897, especially in 1940, they may get referred to, and they may not, but usually they're referred to in guidance material. So we often come across conflicts between AS 1940 and the regulation. So we follow the regulation because that's the highest level. We forget about 1940, even though our maintenance contractor tells us that we need to do this, we say, well, it's not legislated, and besides, there's a high level law here that says we need to do this instead. So just be aware, in WA, for example, both of those standards have been gazetted. They are actually a legal requirement, so it's quite a challenge. I think as time has gone on with underground fuel systems at petrol service stations, councils and EPAs have become quite concerned about groundwater contamination. And we've seen a real growth, especially in the last 6 to 12 months. There's some really good guidance coming out. A lot of it seems to be copy and pasted from state to state, but there's some really good guidance out there on managing fuel systems. And we try and use that to really gather our references and help with putting documents together, especially procedural documents. But look out for what the regulator's producing, especially in that space, rather than target at Marinas and apply it as you feel fit. In the last 3 weeks, I think I've noticed 3 separate fuel spill incidents in one particular marina. Now, it's quite unusual to get that number in such a short period of time, but it's not uncommon to get small, very small leaks from boats, from bilges, automatic bilge pumps, etc. And the first thing we do with that is go and investigate our fuel system. So that's really reactive mode. But when it comes to our fuel infrastructure, we prefer being on the front foot and being in a proactive mode. So there's really 4 main areas that we kind of look at. Our planned maintenance, which we use one contractor for, and then I call it our checks and balances on the other side of the fence there. We use a separate contractor for that. The reason I like this degree of separation is, your fuel contractor that puts in some new pipe work, if they're testing their own work, they obviously want it to pass, don't they? And they're not going to be as diligent about it as getting someone independent to test that. Some fuel contractors will use an independent tester. Companies like Leighton O'Brien, who are primarily technicians that do tank testing, for example, could go down a path of doing integrity testing and plant maintenance themselves, but they've chosen not to because they want that degree of separation. So I'm not saying that's the way you should go about it, but it's certainly worth considering. So on the planned maintenance, I really think about 3 areas: your user checks, having a risk-based approach, so designing your planned maintenance around your system once you understand what it looks like, and reporting. So reports are probably the most important, one of the most important elements of this. In our user checks, we do our dock walks, as most people would do, but we also check our fuel dispenser sumps, and in some cases we put clear covers on them so they're easy to check, and our turrets to check that there's no leaks from the submersible pumps where fitted. So they're just things that are very easy to do in-house, but they identify probably 90% of the problems quite early on. And then we always do our water finding paste checks on our closing dips. So we do have tank gauging, and our tank gauging has a little float at the bottom of the tank, and that will show up if there's any water at the bottom. However, the dipstick and the paste is just the most reliable method out there. Gets right down to the bottom of the tank, and we'll continue to do that, even though we use our tank gauging data for our stock control and analysis. Fortunately, we haven't any fuel filters that look quite like this. I'm not sure where this shot came from, but that's just an indication of what could be growing in the bottom of a diesel tank. Petrol tanks, contamination seems to be slightly different. We don't see, I think it's so toxic that a lot of bacteria just can't live in there. So, but yeah, this would be from a diesel system. Remember that your pickup from your submersible pumps, that's what's fitted to your tanks, is usually about 5 inches off the bottom. So providing, if you've got a little bit in there, you can manage that, clean up every now and then. But once you get more, 10 or 15 mil, I'd seriously think about getting it out of the tank as quick as possible so it doesn't grow. Has anyone in here had some turkey turn up at their front reception and make accusations of, providing dirty fuel or tanks full of water? Yeah, it's happened to all of us, I think. So I think what helps to, you can put, if you do some kind of fuel quality analysis, some kind of tank sampling reports, whether it's in-house or external, it just means that when those people turn up, you can, politely tell them to go away and have confidence in what you're saying. So as part of our maintenance contract, we get a lab analysis done from each of our tanks once a year. And we also do, when we get our tank testing done, we also get our just a visual analysis, appearance testing done as well. So twice a year we get a report from an external provider. It just gives us confidence that the tanks are clean and our fuel is clean. If you don't want to go down that path, there's nothing wrong with just getting the clean jam jars, dispense a bit of product, once a week, let it settle, do a visual on it in the sun, and take a photograph as proof, some evidence that your fuel's clean. It gives you something to back yourself up with. So the report's really important. We get sometimes a 30-page written report from our fuel contractor, which may seem a bit over the top, but it does provide a summary. It lists all of the work in detail that's been done. It also highlights any recommendations and gives us a risk analysis of those recommendations. We don't usually agree with their level of, their risk assessment. They put stuff in very high categories that I just put, really quite low. But that's how it is, and we choose what we want to do about it. And usually we get some photographs that support those high-risk items. The great thing about the report, though, is you can, you can plan some capital expenditure, use it for your budgets, and you can demonstrate through ongoing reports your continuous improvement, show that you actually are being proactive and doing something. And the other good thing with reports, is with changes of management, changes of ownership, it gives someone else something to pick up, and get a grasp of your site and how it's tracking. So coming to the checks and balances side of things, we start off with our SIRA, our stock inventory reconciliation analysis. Basically fuel in, fuel out, and what's the difference between the two. We need that to meet our legal requirements in New South Wales. And apart from looking at gains and losses, which could be from water coming in or fuel being lost somewhere, we're especially interested in the trends. That's the most useful part of the reports for us. So in New South Wales, they talk about a loss monitoring requirement. In Victoria, they talk about a leak detection requirement. In Moreton Bay Council, they talk about a leak detection requirement. And what we're looking for is this is a method that can track up to 18 litres of loss or gain per day with 95% reliability. I'm not saying you can actually lose 18 litres of fuel per day into the marine or the soil, but that's the level of confidence that we're looking for. And it's very low cost. I think it's around $25 per tank per month, so it's money very well spent. And we get a report from that from our fuel analyst. And here's an example, just a snapshot from a recent report. So the column on the left is our sales, then we've got our deliveries. The middle column is our dips, and you can see because they're in the hundreds, but that's a manual dipping process, not tank gauging. Which really means the next column is almost irrelevant, because when you're doing manual dips, getting within 100, 200 litres, you're not going to get any better than that. Quite often 200s are fairly reasonable, quite reasonable achievement, I suppose, especially when the sun's shining, it's petrol. But it's that trend line on the right-hand column that's most important, and this is corrected data. So this has had any erroneous kind of dips and things taken and stripped out of it. And you can see there that we've got this is the end of the month. Over that month we had a very gradual but consistent loss. So that's something we would investigate. We'd be looking in our dispensers to check that there's no internal small leaks there. And we'd be considering things like calibration of the dispensers. Is it over-dispensing fuel, for example, and that's your loss. So the trends are really important, whether they're trending as a loss or as a gain. Now because it's only 280 litres in a month, and you average that out to your 18 litres a day, this is not a fail, but it would normally get flagged up in a report to look at it again. In our groundwater sampling then, for us it's meeting some legal requirements, but it's much more common with environmental site assessments. So if you're going through a business sale process, usually the buyer, as part of due diligence, will require an environmental site assessment, and that's when they're going to analyse your groundwater around your fuel tanks and your sewage treatment plant, those kind of places of risk. Also, you find your head leases, when you're reviewing a head lease, quite often they'll also require a baseline before that feeds into a new lease period. So being ahead of the game and knowing the state of play before you come to these times is quite useful. And what we're looking for in groundwater sampling is really BTEX, so that's benzene, toluene, ethylene and xylene. They're the four constituents within hydrocarbon fuels, petrol and diesel, that are very easy to detect and to trace. And again, we're looking for trends. Leak detection system requirement, and we have to get our groundwater monitoring wells tested every 6 months. And in Victoria, if it's a sensitive site, and I'd say that most marinas are sensitive because they're close to the watercourse, there's a requirement to have groundwater wells installed, and you should be doing a visual check on those every month, according to the law. So how you go about that, I don't know. You can just do a visual on a baler sample in-house. And then in Queensland, it's local council driven. So you really need to get your head around what are your legal requirements, state to state, council to council. Here's another snapshot from a recent report. So in Victoria, we're not legally required to have our fuel groundwater analysed. We're just required to do an observation on it. But we still get ours tested every 6 months. And of interest was about 6 or 8 months ago, for the first time, we noticed some product, some BTEX values in one of our well reports. So you can see the BTEX values there on the first 4 columns, and then you've got naphthalene, which is mostly petrol. And then to the right of that, we have a breakdown of these carbon chain lengths. So the C6 to C10 is really in the petrol range. Once you get C12 up to C36, you're looking in the kind of diesel range of fuel, so that gives you an indication of where those BTEX values sit. So pretty confident this is some kind of petrol. And we suspect it was from, we have some boat storage on top of a grass area where this monitoring well was. We think it must have been a leak from a boat. It's gone away now, which is great to see. But just be conscious of these numbers, are micrograms, they're parts per billion. So they're very small numbers, and the level of detection is very accurate. So they're really good early indicators. We're looking for that, obviously that falling trend when we do see something like this. We'll go on to integrity testing next, but before going on to there, just mention some design considerations if you are putting in new infrastructure. We start with the tank builder, and we try and put stainless steel fittings on the tanks in that construction. We always put in a three-way valve in the turret. The reason we've got a three-way valve is for integrity testing. It means there's a port available to plug the hose into and test your fuel lines from that single point. It's really, really useful, makes it much quicker, much easier. We have the turrets, which are welded to the top of the tank or sealed to the top of the tank. We have those integrity tested. It just means that no water is going to get into that turret and cause any corrosion, any degradation of the system. And having big turrets that are well laid out gives you good access for maintenance. It just helps with maintenance costs overall. So some of these things obviously attract higher initial costs, more capital outlay, but when you look at the life cycle of the asset, you're happily going to probably push into that 30 to 40 years. So this money you can spend early on is very well spent. And also, it means you've got lower ongoing maintenance costs when these design factors kick in. So integrity testing, we tend to go to a digital method. As a routine, we get these done every 12 months. All of our tanks and lines, inners and outer on the lines. And we also consider pre- and post-burial testing for any upgrades and repairs, depending on where that is. This gauge here is an analog test, so this is a recent bit of repair work or upgrade work that happened. It sat on this 30 psi on the gauge there for about 2 hours, so obviously no problems. We've had an ongoing fuel leak from that part of the pipe work for the last couple of months as well. So I just don't trust gauge testing. Luckily it's in a dispenser sub, so it's easy to manage. It's low quantities, but it's still there. I just don't, I just go for a digital testing method. We've got some of that planned anyway, so hopefully that will reveal all. Now, integrity testing does cost money, and so how often and why would you do that? Well, you might get back to your system, design if you've got steel tanks, if you've got fiberglass tanks, etc. From our fiberglass tanks, we've had 3 tank failures in the last couple of years for tank testing, which quite surprised me. It's usually things like the fittings on the top, where you've got a gasket that's started to leak, which might mean you've got petrol fumes coming into the turret and explosion risk. So don't assume that just because it's it's polyethylene or fiberglass tanks that it's not going to have a problem. And I think because we've detected so many issues over the years from integrity testing, it's money well spent to do it once a year. But you've got to balance out how much money you're making from your fuel sales and your AG system and what are the checks and balances you have in place, your user checks, etc. So just, that's your decision really. Obviously, if you have got steel tanks, that's going to increase your risk profile. And there's plenty of marinas out there that are still operating with steel tanks. If you put in a plastic tank, as we call it, just to generalise, they've usually got a warranty for 25 to 30 years. Now, from about the year 2000, very rare that you'd have a steel tank unless it was a fiberglass wrapped tank. It'd be very rare that there was a steel tank. So most of them out there are over 20 years old. And what is the working life of those tanks? I'd put them at 20, 25 years max, typically. And what warranty will they provide it with? I don't think they provide it with any because it's such a high risk. So worth just having a really good look at steel tanks if that's what you've got. And then when it comes to the pre-burial, never been a massive advocate of this in the past because it's just additional cost, and usually as part of your DA you're required to do post-burial testing anyway, final testing to get your certification. But why pre-burial? And this photo really kind of brought it to life to me. So here we've got a welded join on a HDPE pipe, and the secondary, the outer pipe, has obviously failed its test, even though someone wrote the OK on that weld to say that it was fine. So if that's then covered in concrete and you do your digital testing and you find you've got a leak and a failure, you've got to dig it all up again. So if you've got a few $100s per line, I think it's money well spent. So they're the areas we kind of look at as part of our practical approach. And to summarise then, really understand what your legal requirements are and implement those. But especially try and learn your system, get a real good understanding of what you've got on the ground there, how your system works, and where things can go wrong. And then evaluate that risk and put in a planned maintenance program around that risk. If you've got a number of sites like we have, then the risk profile varies from site to site, and the maintenance program can be dictated by that. Make sure you keep all of your reports centralised as possible, ideally electronic with names so people can actually find them down the track when your staff changes, etc. Usually they're going to your environmental protection plan as well, and I usually make references in there to where stuff is stored. Track your maintenance reports so that you can show improvements, so when something does go wrong, you can show that you are actually proactive, that you do look at your risk and make improvements. And provide training to your staff, especially for those user checks, make sure they understand how things work, things like leak detectors, how they function if there's a leak. Yeah, really important. So that's all I had today. There might be a couple of minutes for questions. I'm not sure how we're tracking on time. If you wanted a copy of this toolkit, you can download it from the Lake O'Brien website. It lists all of some great guidance in there. It's also got all the legislative and guidance kind of references, so it's very useful. And I think we've got some copies at booth 21, the stand there. Now, Toby here pretty much answered any questions that I can't, I'd hope. So if anyone's got any particular questions, they'd be welcome to hear them.
I've got time for questions, so sort of question.
It's tea time.
Is those container systems where you get a above ground system which falls on those rather than underground?
We did look at above ground tanks for one of the sites. I think it depends on whether you've got, whether it's petrol or diesel, especially, and then you want to start looking at your hazardous areas around that, where you need to put in, vapor barrier walls and etc. So it really just depends on site-to-site layout, I think. I know, like Hampton Island, it's all above ground tanks, isn't it? Storage tanks there. It's quite a fuel farm, but yeah, I can talk to you more about where you're actually located if you want. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
What's your thoughts on burying pipes as opposed to looking?
I think most buried pipelines, they don't have any joins in them. Usually you bury your connection points in a valve sump. You can get some fairly long lengths of polyethylene line. So I think they're very low risk when they're buried. They're not exposed, providing you know where they are at the right depth, they're not exposed to mechanical damage. And I say if you know where they are, because quite often, if they're under concrete, you may not know unless you've got photographs exactly where they run. So providing you've got detailed drawings and that kind of information, I think buried pipelines are the way to go. You may think they're out of sight, but you can also put leak detection systems between the two layers. We use that on our floating marinas where there's a lot of movement. It just means that if the outer line rubs through, then you get an alarm go off before it starts impacting on the inner line. So it's a fairly cost-effective, early warning system. And there's no reason you wouldn't put that the whole length of your buried lines as well. So you've got continuous monitoring. But yeah, I think I'd always go for buried lines as much as possible, but not above ground.
Yeah, we've got the automated tank monitoring on our tanks as well. From later, we're not allowed to store automated above ground. It's got to be buried. But just curious, the difference between the dips and what the tank monitoring is saying. Is there any?
Yeah, we often get discrepancies, and we keep all our manual dips in a separate set of data to our tank gauging. We always use our automatic tank gauging for our stock analysis, and when we get our fuel deliveries, we always make sure that we usually get 2 temperature values on there. So you get your terminal 15-degree value and you get your ambient temperature value. So because your fuel dispensers are ambient, your dips are ambient, we always use the ambient temperature from the delivery docket. And that keeps them fairly close together. But depending on what your groundwater temperature is, your buried temperature is, you're always going to get some discrepancy as fuel either warms up or cools down. And it can, depending on the tank size, I don't know what yours are, but if you had a 50,000 litre tank, you could easily get a 500 litre difference just through temperature change. So the other thing with tank gauging is really important the way it's calibrated. So usually you get a strapping chart from the tank manufacturer, and it might give you 50 different points down that chart for different depths and what the value should be, and that can account for fittings that are in there as well. So it should be calibrated with at least 20 points of data to get any kind of reasonable results out of it. And we found that when that's been done properly, we get some really accurate and consistent measurements. When it hasn't been done properly, then it's all over the place, and you're fighting to know which data to use.
Prior to putting in the tank monitoring system, or after the tank monitoring system was installed, we found out we're getting short deliveries, 200 litres, 500 litres. So
yeah, I noticed this ourselves, and we that's the first thing we started looking at. We've been, just theft, and actually when we started, what we then found was it was the 15-degree temperature rating that was being put into the data, and once it put it in at an ambient level and it kind of balanced out a bit, we started to look for those trends in your SERA, and you see that it just for a couple of days after that delivery it all kind of evens out. Sorry, I mentioned wasn't the case, but yeah, it's certainly something to be suspicious of.
now we pay on what the tank monitoring system says.
Okay. That sounds like a good way to go. Yeah, because the other problem is once you do a fuel delivery, you're supposed to wait for, I think, half an hour before you do the dip.
Yeah.
Your tanker delivery guys are not going to hang around for half an hour before he checks his final levels. But I mean, weights and measures, people who regulate the calibration equipment they use can be pretty heavy on that industry, I would have thought. I'm sure there'd be a lot more oversight than we have.
It's Thailand.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Sure, and then Martin will be available for you, if any questions. But that was very informative, thank you, Martin. So could everyone put their hands